and they have to be redesigned. Now, here's the problem with redesigning schools. There's a physics problem. Education has a certain physics to it. This is it. Schools are designed so that in about 180 days, at the average length of a school day, we expect one middle-class child to make 1 year's progress in math and reading in 1 school year's time. That's the physics, right? Certain number of days, certain number of hours, certain amount of progress. That's how schools are designed. It's not designed so middle-class kids will make 2 years progress, or half. It's designed so they will make 1 year's progress. So if I have a school that has my students 2 years behind, and I could wave a magic wand, I could change the principal, I could change the teachers, I could change the community, I could even change the family and make it all positive. The physics says a year later, those kids would still be 2 years behind. So a lot of people have a hard time understanding this. So I like to use an example. You ever learned something in school, you said, I will never use this, right? If a train left Detroit heading west at 30 miles an hour at 9 o'clock in the morning, and another train left Detroit heading west at 30 miles an hour at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, when will train B catch train A? Never. It's never going to happen. And so why is it that we think if our kids are behind, that we're going to close that gap if they simply are in school the same amount of time as other kids who are on grade level? The physics makes no sense. And yet there is no city in this country that has admitted there's a physics problem. You know what they do? They fire their superintendents. All over America, you get the same thing. It's not working anywhere. See, you understand what I'm saying? It's not working anywhere. Everywhere you go, you have the same physics problem, because once you get behind, you have to be in school a longer school day and a longer school year to catch up. That's why all the good charter schools have extended days and extended years, because they realize it's going to take them longer to get those kids caught up. And since you don't have a longer time, you have to do a longer day, and you have to keep your schools open longer. Now, people, you know what? That costs money. People don't want to spend the money. So I tell you what you do. You fire your superintendent when they can't produce results. I don't care what they tell you they're going to do. They come in, they try it, it ain't going to work. They're going to fire the superintendent, they're going to bring the next person in. Now look, you can start where I've started and get all the kids from birth on grade level, then you don't have that problem. My kids are on grade level, right? But I've got a bunch of kids who are not. I've got to keep those kids in school longer. I've got to work in the summertime. I've got to work after school. I've got to make sure these kids make it. There is not another alternative. Now, here's the other issue. If people can't teach children, they ought not keep a job. That's the problem. I get in a lot of trouble for this, right? Because people think I'm just saying, if you've taught, teaching is really hard. And I think teachers are way underpaid. I think we should pay teachers the way we pay lawyers and doctors. I really believe that, right? Because I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. My son is a lawyer. And when he first got out of law school, he called and he said, Dad, I got a job in Boston. I said, that's great, son. You know, first thing, boy, my son's got a job. Great. He said, you know what they're paying me? I said, no. He said, they're paying me $140,000 a year. I said, what? I said, well, what do you do? He says, well, I don't know, because everybody knows I don't know nothing. I'm just out of law school. I said, wait a second. They pay you $140,000 a year and they know you don't know nothing? He said, yeah. I said, well, that's a great racket. I should have been a lawyer. Like, how do you? So here's the deal, though. This is true. Here's the deal. In law, they believe you find the most talented kids, you bring them in your firm, and you work them to death. Right? You make them work 50, 60-hour weeks for years, and you see who can do it and who can't. And over time, the ones that can't, they quit or you get rid of them, and the ones you make partner are people who can keep the standards up high. I think we need the same thing for teachers. There's no reason school has to end at 3. There's no reason. Well, if you're a professional, You work as long as you need to work. Some places you got to work till 5 every day. Maybe some places till 7. That's what we all do. If you got work to do, you can't go home and say, I'm done, right? You get the work done. But you got to pay people like professionals if you want to treat them like professionals. But this whole system that we've designed where it doesn't work for poor children, right? It works fine in other places. I don't worry about it. A lot of places, schools are fine, but not for poor children. It's a system that doesn't make sense. Look, when I started my schools, I told my chancellor, head of our schools, I told our mayor, I told my board, in 5 years, if I don't have better schools than these other schools, I'm going to fire myself. I said it publicly, and I meant it. When everybody left, I got all my staff together. I said, but y'all know I'm the last one leaving, right? Let's just be clear about this, right? I mean, in the end, this is shared responsibility, right? But the failure is not an option. When failure is not an option, you do what you have to do, right? If failure is an option, then the option is to fail, right? So if you got an option to fail, say, look, that's the default position. The default position in Detroit is failure. That's default, right? When that's eliminated, when you have to succeed, see, if you know you can't keep your job if you fail, people tend to work hard, stay late, work weekends, do whatever you have to do. But unfortunately, in education, not an option. Don't ask me why. Doesn't make any sense to me. Most important thing you could be doing with kids, the option is, yep, not done, but I'm out of here. Don't work. So evaluation, data, absolutely critical. I don't care what you're doing with children. I don't care if you're running after school. I don't care what you do. You need to be able to use data to drive results. So in our 100, we have a 97-block area. We start with children from birth. We stay with them through adulthood. We provide supports for all of their needs. We look at community building, housing. We clean up the streets. We eliminate graffiti. We try and make sure the adults play a conscious role in the lives of young people. And we've begun to see a change. And don't fool yourselves. A lot of people have come to me and said, you know, Jeff, yeah, but Harlem, you know, it's not like my community. I said, look, before we started this work, Harlem had been losing population for over 20 years. No one wanted to live there. It was the place you ended up when you couldn't get any place else. Now, Harlem's one of the most expensive places for folks to live in the city. Now look, it's the same place it was. When we started this work, people told me it could not be done. It was too hard, too complicated. New York City was too big, too unwieldy. Of course it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done. But I will tell you this, no one's going to do it for you. It's not going to happen unless someone decides to do it themselves. And it is a mission that's going to take you some years to do. So my challenge, right, to you all is to really think through how you could save Detroit's kids. Now, wait, I'm working with 8,000 kids in this 97-block area, about 10,000 kids there. So it's not all of Harlem. It's not all of Harlem. We can't do all of Harlem, right? We said we're going to do our share, right? We're going to do our share. But for our share, we're going to make sure it works, right? So for my 8,000, these kids are going to be successful. I'm going to make sure these kids graduate college and get degrees. That's what I'm going to make sure. There is nothing else that we're focused on except that. Now, part of the problem is this issue is so big, people don't know where to begin. And if you try and do everything, you end up doing nothing. Or then people do these little tiny things that really don't make a difference. I'm pushing that. I think we should be somewhere in between. So let me leave you with two things that I think I want you to focus on. One is that you have to think outside the box. And the second is that we have to be doing two things at the same time. You got to take care of the crisis now, and you have to prevent the crisis from occurring at the same time. And I'm going to start with that second thing because people get confused about this. You've got kids right now who are in crisis, and you focus energy and effort on them. And then you've got kids that if you don't do something now, they will be in crisis in 3 or 4 years. And people don't know what to do about that. And I think there's an obvious answer. And whenever I talk to groups about this, I remind them, this is something that I heard. It was really a great story. They talked about a group of people who were walking through the woods. They were camping, and they heard a child crying and screaming for help, and they ran to the river, and there was a child in the river drowning, and a guy jumps in, and he goes, and he grabs the child, and he pulls the child out the river, and as he's pulling the child out, they see another child coming down the river crying for help. And a woman jumps in, and she goes, and she grabs that. No sooner as she grabbed that child, and you see a third child going down. So then a woman jumps in, and the fourth person, the last one left, took off running up the hill, and the other said, where are you going? You have to stay, because the kids are going. I'm going to find out who's throwing the kids in the river, right? So here we are. Here, this is the dilemma that stops people from acting. The kids are in the river, and you know they're drowning. And you got to go out and save the kids. And yet, there's another kid coming, and another kid coming, and another kid coming, and you don't know what to do. Now, it's hard to say who's the most courageous in that story. The ones in the river or the one running up the hill? Because the one running up the hill knows I may not be able to save the next child or the next 5 children in the river. Somehow we have got stuck there, and we got to do both. We got to save our children, and we've got to stop this thing from going on. And so that's the early intervention, getting these kids on grade level, making sure they never fall behind. So even if we can't save every child, we know there's a cutoff date, that this date certain, our children will be saved. And I never suggest we don't go in that river and save those kids. I never suggest we don't do that. But I don't say don't get it twisted and think that's the only thing we ought to be doing. We got to do both things at the same time. And this second issue, and then I'm going to take a couple of questions. The second issue is that we've got to be prepared to think outside the box. That in the end, this is science. This is not hope. This is science. The science of saving children, we're still writing that science every day. I tell people this is not rocket science. It's much harder than rocket science. Rocket science we figured out. This science, we're still in the process of understanding how to do this work. We don't have all the answers, and so we have to be prepared to think outside the box. But unfortunately, people get caught in certain ways of thinking, and they tend to do more of what's not working. Right? Whatever's not working, they just tend to do more, and they don't think of what's a more creative way of looking at this. And whenever I think about this, I think of how my whole life was changed because one person was able to think outside the box. I was an undergraduate student. I went to Bowdoin College up in Maine. It's a very elite private school, and I wasn't very well prepared for it. And I went there as a freshman. They asked what my major was. I said psychology. They said, how's your math? I don't really do that math thing. I'm into social science, you know. They said, well, you've got to pass statistics. And there are a lot of people in a different major because of statistics. And I said, okay, so freshman year, I knew better than to take statistics. But sophomore year, I had to declare a major. I had to take it. So first semester, I have to take statistics. We get our first test. I study all week. I'm up all night. I get the test back a week later. I got a 37. I got a 37. I hadn't failed anything since second grade. I was devastated. I was humiliated. I was totally crushed. I didn't know what to do. I was in tears. I went to the professor. I was like, I worked so hard. I tried. I've got to be a psych major. I want to help people. I don't know what to do. He said, Jeff, calm down, calm down. He said, I know what happened. I said, you do? What happened? He said, it was the slant. I said, what do you mean it was a slant? He says, well, you'll get this. All of our textbooks have real authors. And the authors have their own biases that come up through their writing. He said, this author of this textbook has a particularly strong bias. It's working for everybody else. It's not working for you. He says, I want to give you a textbook with an author with an opposite bias to see if it works. I said, nah. He said, no, a little experiment. Read tonight's chapter, do the problems, see what happens. I read the chapter, did the problems, I didn't get it. So I want you to read that same chapter in the new book, do the problems, see what happens. I read the chapter, I did the problems, I got it. I said, look, I understood it. He said, well, no, let's be careful. We got final coming up. Got 3 more chapters, read them in the old book, do the questions, see what happens.